Morning, everyone. I'm here to welcome you. We've taken a minute or two longer because there are about 40 people, where they would sit I don't know, who haven't arrived. But we've decided to proceed. And I'm going to hand over to Nick Frangos, who is chairman of what we call our Luminary Committee. And he will be the MC. Before I do that, though, I will mention that when I spoke to Dr Reuel Khoza, with whom I go back a long way, about this award and whether he would accept it, I was quite honored by him saying that it's not something that even needs to be thought about. It was because of our association and his respect for the work we do, something he would be ready and willing and keen to accept. So we are going to, Nick is chairman. Nick was also, I might say, the instigator of Dr. Khoza as our awardee. And Nick, if you can come and take over the MC.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for attending this important function today. The Luminary Award process for the Free Market Foundation aims at identifying persons who have put a huge amount into society, whether it's in business, socially, or however, giants of our time that we can all learn from. And the full text of their speeches are on the FMF website, if anybody's interested. Firstly, I'd like to welcome our former chairman, Herman Mashaba, who's off the stumping trail to be here at lunch today, and Ayanda Kumalo, who's current chairman. My job today is to introduce Mike Brown, and thank him very much, Mike, for hosting the function. Mike is the Chief Executive Officer of the Nedbank Group, previously with BOE, and has got an extensive education background prior to business, including Harvard, and born in Zimbabwe, as I was. So that's one commonality. So thank you very much, Mike, and I'd like to call on you to introduce our 10th luminary, Dr. Reuel Khoza. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick, and can I add my welcome to all of the guests joining us here today, and I think just in particular to Reuel, Mumsy and family, welcome home. I hope it was a special moment for you walking down the corridor, seeing the portraits of all of our ex-chairmen and to see Reuel's at the end. And if any of you missed it on the way in, please have a look on the way out. So it certainly is a real privilege for us at Nedbank to host this event here today, to recognize someone who we certainly know very well and respect, and someone who I had the privilege of working very closely with for just over 5 years when Reuel was the chairman as I took over for chief executive. So Reuel was my boss for an extended period of time. And Reuel, you were certainly, as I've said on many occasions, an inspiration to Nedbankers. And I think your focus on integrity, honesty, governance, doing the right things, and saying what needs to be said, even when it's uncomfortable, is certainly a beacon for all of us. And Reuel, I think to most people here, needs absolutely no introduction, but I think it is fitting on an occasion like this to say a few things from Reuel's very lengthy CV, just in case any of you had forgotten some of Reuel's achievements. So Reuel is certainly a very distinguished thinker, businessman. He's been president of the Institute of Directors. He's an Africanist, public speaker, and a change agent at the forefront of black economic empowerment. And he is both a practitioner and theorist in the field of African leadership, something that's really, really passionate to him. He has been hailed as a role model in corporate life. He spent most of his childhood in the Bushbuck Ridge area, Acorn Hook, I think, or just near Acorn Hook, in the Mpumalanga province. He has an honours degree in psychology and a master's degree in marketing management, and he entered marketing and soon after gravitated to management consulting. As a management consultant and later company director, he promoted the management philosophy based on Afrocentricity and Ubuntu. In 1997, he was appointed chairman of Eskom and led the transformation of the company from being a bastion of the old South Africa to becoming the country's vanguard in Africa, its preeminent energy supplier, no rolling blackouts under Reuel's chairmanship, and a catalyst for Pan-African cooperation and socio-economic development. In 2005, he relinquished the chairmanship of Eskom to pursue new business opportunities, chiefly through the vehicle Accra Capital, a leading black-owned private equity and investment holding company. In the 1990s, he also spent a lot of time as an author, with the publication of a booklet on Ubuntu, followed by The African in My Dream. He returned to authorship in 2005, co-authoring The Power of Governance with his legal advisor at Eskom, Mohammed Adam. And Let Africa Lead is his third book, which was followed by Attuned Leadership in 2011. Reuel became chairman of the Nedbank Group in May 2006 and remained chairman for the 9-year period that we have for non-executive directors through to May 2015. And during the same time served on the Old Mutual PLC board, continued his work at Accra Capital. He also chairs Dazana Investments, which is a family concern run by his daughter, and serves on the board of Nampak. He has also recently assumed chairmanship of Globalec, I hope I've said that correctly, an experienced developer, owner, and operator of independent power projects in Africa. In addition to his lengthy business career, Reuel has always had extensive time for academia. And after obtaining his doctorate at the University of Warwick, he was Professor Extraordinaire at the University of Stellenbosch Business School from 2002 to 2008, where he guest lectured on business strategy, leadership, and corporate governance. Was visiting professor at the Rhodes Investec Business School, in fact still is, 2006 to date. And in 2007, Rhodes University conferred on him the Honorary Doctorate of Laws. He is currently a professor at the University of the Free State, and Reuel told me earlier you've just been or about to be awarded your economics doctorate from the University of the Free State, and visiting professor at Wits Business School and chancellor of the University of Limpopo, where he succeeded the late Nelson Mandela. So I think that is an extremely impressive CV in any terms. Shifting now a little bit to what I became to know of Reuel as his two great passions outside business and academia. Firstly, Reuel the farmer. And Reuel is certainly an extremely keen farmer of avos and macadamias in the Hazyview area. And his venture there, I think you told me earlier, last year or this year, is going to pack 1.7 million trays of avos, and is the second largest exporter in South Africa. And I certainly know that Reuel is often at his happiest in his farm in Hazyview. The second is Reuel the musician, and I have no doubt if Reuel had not gone into business, he would have opted to be a musician of the classical genre. After publishing, I think what was by then his sixth book in 2011, Reuel branched into music following the death of a cousin who was a prolific composer. Reuel worked as the executive producer in tandem with Mark Shane, the orchestra cum arranger and technical producer, to have date orchestrated and recorded 60 of his cousin's compositions with the KwaZulu-Natal Philharmonic Orchestra, and they were nominated for a SAMA Award in the Best Classical and Instrumental Album. And certainly the Nedbank board dinners don't quite have the same standard of music. Reuel always took a very, very keen interest in that. He's married to Mumsy, and they have had 3 children, a son who has sadly passed away, and 2 daughters who I think both, or certainly one of them, is with us here today. So it really is a great pleasure to call on Reuel to come forward and to accept the award from Nick.
I'd like to ask Mike Brown and Ayanda, who's the current chairman, if you can come up as well, Ayanda, to present the award to Reuel.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and may I kick off by thanking Nick for having agitated for the award to be given to me. I'm not terribly sure I am deserving. When I looked at the luminaries that came before me, I felt very, very humbled indeed. I'm humbled and greatly honored. May I also thank my former colleague, not ex-colleague, former colleague. It's nicer and there's a good ring about it. I'm also not an ex-chairman, I'm a former chairman. Ex-chairmen are generally very miserable creatures. The only thing more miserable than an ex-chairman is an ex-politician. They're pathetic. So, Mike, I'm not your ex-colleague, I'm your former colleague. English is a way of putting things, in euphemisms. So I'm more comfortable with the euphemisms. Thank you very much. Mike, having worked with you and you having introduced me so many times on so many occasions, I think you've just earned yourself something quite painful. I'm going to make my transition into the hereafter before you. So the kinds of things that you say about me that should be said about somebody who can sin no more, you will actually have to say that when I can no longer sin. So you consider yourself invited. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very, very grateful for the award. I wasn't too sure I'll be sufficiently bold to give an acceptance speech, and so I brought my family, my wife and my 2 daughters. And the daughters actually insisted on reading my draft speech before I finalized it because they believe at times I don't self-filter. I say things I shouldn't be saying, I say things I regret. But not only that, I mean, both of them have said to me on a number of occasions, Dad, you are not speaking in English. You use English words, but you don't speak in English. Because they went to good schools. I went to some school that actually made sure I was brain damaged by the time I completed. So, amongst other things, they said, don't use big words. And I said, I didn't. And they said, what about sagacious? And I said, but I mean, sagacious is the only word I can use in describing Mahatma Gandhi. They said, no, how about using astute? I said, astute, you as a young girl can be astute, but you can't be sagacious. In order for you to be sagacious, you have to be a sage. And in order for you to be a sage, you must be wise and old. So I'm not changing that one. And ultimately, we agreed. So I'm grateful to the family for accompanying me here. I'm grateful to everybody who has come to witness my accepting the award. Leon, I could say 1,000 things about you because you and I, in the decade of the 80s, worked together so much to ensure that some of the regulations that hobbled entrepreneurship were removed. I mean, you dedicated yourself 110% to that, and we're very, very grateful to you for that. But you also went to Senegal when it was fashionable to go and see our friends in exile, ANC. And you did suggest, amongst other things, that perhaps a federal structure for South Africa with a certain number of dimensions should be the one to go for. Who knows, had they listened to you, even what we're witnessing in Pretoria today, perhaps we would not be witnessing, because people would be emerging, as it were, from their communities, as opposed to being imposed. And you cannot cheat people when it comes to that. If you are my representative, I know. If you are my non-representative who is actually imposed, I also know. So perhaps I should have listened to you as early as 1988, 89, when it was still fashionable to go to Senegal. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I wish to extend my sincerest gratitude to the Free Market Foundation for their continued and far-reaching engagement with a wide number of stakeholders, and especially for championing the cause of basic freedoms. In particular, the Free Market Foundation has made us all aware of the essential connection between economic freedom and peaceful cooperation under the rule of law, for the sake of those of us who are living now, for the sake of posterity, but also for prosperity for all of us as South Africans. I recall a specific time when the Free Market Foundation engaged with the National African Federated Chamber of Commerce. I saw Bobby Makwetla here, who I worked with during those years pretty closely. In a very real sense, it kind of gave me an inkling of what it will feel like when we meet in heaven, because we have not actually met over the past 23 years. So I recall a specific time when the Free Market Foundation engaged with the National African Federated Chamber of Commerce, NAFCOC, in Southwark, working with the said chamber to learn lessons from such political economies as Hong Kong at the time. NAFCOC and the Free Market Foundation initiated the Law Review project, which was responsible during the 1980s and 1990s for identifying many anti-business and discriminatory laws and drafting amendments to relax or scrap them. This allowed people to start business without asking anyone's specific permission, which in turn created many jobs. The Free Market Foundation has played an important part in the transformation of economic policies in South Africa during the 3 decades of its existence. I am deeply honored to receive this Luminary Award from the Free Market Foundation. The freedom to conduct business without undue restrictions is an aspect of all of this. Let us not be persuaded or deluded that economic freedom means that the state should be used to force freedom, quote unquote, on us through increased regulation that effectively hobbles employment. Real freedom promotes creativity and innovation. And if there is one thing South Africa really needs more than anything today, it is innovation in the economy, in politics, and in society at large. We must change to become globally competitive and play our part in the world as a respected partner in progress. Sadly, all signs as of now point the other way. For one thing, we are seeing an alarming upsurge in racism as frustration and anger take hold, in place of the spirit of forgiveness and inclusiveness that Nelson Mandela embodied. For another thing, we have seen the emergence of a strange breed of leaders determined to subjugate the rule of law and override our noble constitution. This is not the tolerant and accountable democracy for which generations suffered and fought. Freedom and peace go hand in hand. But if we look at our nation today, we see our hard-won freedoms diminishing while violence and lawlessness are on the increase. We are directionless and have entered a moral wilderness. I'm going to argue that this is due in large part to a failure of leadership. Service delivery protests have accelerated in South Africa in recent years, and they are becoming more violent. According to the monitoring research group Municipal IQ, 86% of protests now involve violence in some form. Rage produces more rage. Tear gas and rubber bullets will not resolve the situation. Anger on anybody's part will not restore reason. We should take our cue from Mahatma Gandhi, who said, I quote, "You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist," close quote. All great leaders of our times have cautioned against violence as the answer to violence. Martin Luther King said, quote, "Peace is not merely a distant goal we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal," close quote. Today, we need a leadership that is visionary and as passionate as it is compassionate. The leadership I refer to should set us all firmly on the road to regeneration through exemplary character, setting high targets for themselves and everyone who takes up the challenge. This is what I've grown to refer to as at your service leadership. In this regard, Mahatma Gandhi's evergreen admonition commands attention till this day, and it behoves us to heed it. Quote, "The things that will destroy us are politics without principles, pleasure without conscience, wealth without work, knowledge without character, business without morality, science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice," close quote. Against this sagacious admonition, as we look at life in contemporary South Africa today, what do we see? Anyone who has eyes to see and cares to observe cannot but notice leadership without moral principles, lurching from scandal to scandal, apparently with impunity. A welfare department insensitive and dismissive, telling the destitute and wretched to be contented with living on less than 750 rands per month, a la Marie Antoinette. A teachers' union hell-bent on corrupting meritocracy by peddling senior posts to the ill-qualified and undeserving, and by so doing, crippling South Africa's future. The attendant government department seems petrified, unable to take decisive corrective action, and much of the nation stands by with placid indifference. Further, latter-day mining magnates who are close to power, we see them exploiting miners to an inhuman degree. One can go on. The law, hobbled by politics, taking its staggering course. We also see an intelligentsia replete with degrees and diplomas, steeped in knowledge, but devoid of courage and character, content to be bystanders through a corrosive, raging moral collapse. In recent times, sections of our corporate leadership, and I must thank you for this, Mike and your colleagues, sections of our corporate leadership have mounted commendable efforts aimed at resolving some of the vexing challenges facing us. However, sections of our business leadership, arguably angling for political largesse, continue to march to an unwholesome political drumbeat, thus slowing down socioeconomic progress. An ethic of service is missing. Such an ethic is exemplified by the late, great Nelson Mandela, and it lies at the heart of what I call attuned leadership. The term denotes the quality of leaders who are attuned to the hopes, expectations, fears, and demands of their followers. They resonate with the followership. Leaders who do not embody this ethic are not attuned to their followers. And the gap shows, and it is manifest in self-serving behavior that effectively denies the bond between leader and follower. The resonant leader makes a conscious choice to improve the lives of others through building better organizations and ultimately creating a more just and caring world. The servant leader, or at your service leader, practices introspection and renewal. There are times when I wonder, given the frenzy of activities that some of our leaders actually seem to be engaged in, whether they ever reflect. The servant leader demonstrates competence, tenacity, and a sense of efficacy on behalf of the followers. Such a leader does not shy away from difficult or unpopular decisions or measures. This is leadership that lives by the tenets of consultation, persuasion, accommodation, and cooperation, and shuns coercion and domination or imposition of leaders from outside to communities that have actually elected their own leaders. It generates trust, goodwill, and confidence, and is politically and personally as gracious, honorable, and magnanimous in defeat as it is in triumph or success. It is a leadership that understands that the success of others does not diminish its own success, but adds to the good of the Commonwealth. It stands to reason that the 21st century servant leader is one who is sufficiently well-informed, one might say even educated or even learned, about the complexities of a globalizing political economy to be capable of managing the job. This requires continual learning. If you stop learning in today's fast-moving world, you actually go backwards and become somewhat irrelevant. This requires continual learning. A leader takes on institutional clothing and should wear it with devotion and unwavering adherence to the oath of office. To be an attuned leader is to be competent with the exercise of authority, particularly moral authority. We only have to look at the frightening example of Donald Trump in the US elections to see how a lack of government experience and caring generally about humanity leads to reckless policy statements on domestic and international issues. We witness the same emotive, thoughtless pursuit of popular appeal on our own soil, raising fears that those who may be elected to public positions may have no idea what they are doing or where they are in fact taking us. The practical side of leadership is all of a piece with its moral nature. You cannot have one without the other. Effective moral leadership encourages us to grow and seek what Aristotle termed the good life, the life that improves us and contributes to the betterment of all. Tragically, what we see developing from the top to the bottom in our greedy and self-serving society, from politics to business and even the family, is the bad life. People cannot flourish, become creative and innovative, or grow to their full potential when their daily lives are threatened by crime, corruption, hunger, ill health, homelessness, the abuse of women and children, and the loss of human dignity. Let us be clear. The greatest threat to freedom in South Africa today is poverty, allied to joblessness and lack of service delivery. The key to prosperity is economic wisdom, and for that we need sensible, steady, goal-directed leadership. Our leadership is failing because its actions at the level of our most important institutions are seriously undermining the trust of stakeholders in our political economy. The reckless firing of a competent, trustworthy Minister of Finance was met with justified outrage, but with our leadership's uncanny ability to repeatedly shoot itself in the foot, this continues to reverberate negatively in investment circles. Unemployment has taken a startling leap in the first quarter of 2016, according to figures released by Statistics SA. Meanwhile, a significant number of municipalities are failing to meet their fiduciary and oversight responsibilities, according to the Auditor General. Rulings of the Constitutional Court and many other courts are treated either with contempt or gay abandon. The National Prosecuting Authority is selectively prosecuting individuals for clearly political reasons, while protecting others from the strong hand of the law. Certain of our state-owned public enterprises are falling into disarray with unsuitable individuals in charge. And the national broadcaster is suppressing news of the unrest sweeping the country, with blackouts very reminiscent of the apartheid era. How can all of this be permitted to go on when the character and virtues of leaders are obviously insufficient to the task? It is the responsibility of followers to take action, assert discipline, and, if necessary, remove the leaders. I call this moral courage. But unfortunately, we are descending into a state of moral turpitude. The silence may indeed be noisy, but it is immoral nonetheless. While the economic freedom fighters turn parliament into a circus and the streets are filled with angry crowds, our leaders are drowning in a quagmire of decadence. From the elite who run the country down to the very lowest levels of society, there are those who are choosing to abandon morality in the pursuit of power, populism, and wealth, thus setting the stage for endemic bribery, malfeasance, and crime. Over time, many more will come to accept that the only crime is to be caught doing wrong. Or as Martin Luther King was wont to putting it, everybody is refusing to obey the 10 commandments, and just about everybody is busy obeying the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. If we are hoping for someone with messianic stature, it is not going to happen. Common citizens must engage and ensure that carpetbaggers don't mess up our hard-earned freedom and democracy. We must make sure the institutions that underpin our democracy are upheld, defended, and promoted to ensure the sustainability of our democracy. Accountable leadership is not attainable. It's not an attainable ideal without accountable citizenship. Leaders should not make servants of us. They should, in fact, be our servants. But we appear to lack courage. According to Winston Churchill, courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees all of the others. Close quote. Courage is the sine qua non for every other virtue. Without courage, essential knowledge and wisdom cannot be used by the ignorant and ill-informed to realize that they are on the wrong path and need to change course. During the treason trial, in his statement from the dock, sheer courage enabled Nelson Mandela to proclaim, I quote, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society, an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Close quote. Steve Biko was just as emphatic on the importance of courage as he declared, quote, "You are either alive and proud or you're dead." Close quote. Moral courage is not based on bravado, the pomp and pageantry of political office, but on dedication to a cause. Knowledge, expertise, a sound value system, and a compelling vision. Leadership, to be effective and noble, ought to commit itself to listening to its own heart and head, that is, if there's something in the cranium, and listening to the appeals of the followership. Africa's philosophy of Ubuntu translates directly into principles of good governance. In my view, good governance is first and foremost a human rights issue. It cannot be otherwise. Only a moral leadership committed to the good of stakeholders, will wholeheartedly commit itself to upholding the basic rights spelled out in our Constitution. Good governance is attuned leadership in action. When there is a national crisis and duty calls, citizens of goodwill, both corporate and individual, must give a resounding response. There can be no gainsaying that the integrity, health, socioeconomic soundness and prosperity of South Africa is the collective responsibility of all of us. But let me emphasize, moral courage is not found on the will to overcome evil by any means possible. Gandhi believed in the courage of nonviolence. To him, all people were sisters and brothers. So how could they turn to hating and destroying each other? He said, I quote, "We may never be strong enough to be entirely nonviolent in thought, word, and deed, but we must keep nonviolence as our goal and make strong progress towards it." Close quote. Naturally, there are occasions, such as in the justly fought war, that violence is inevitable. But we are not there yet, and let us pray that South Africans who have demonstrated their good sense before by reaching the political settlement of 1994 will do so again without a civil war. The stakes are very high. Let us not fool ourselves. As a nation, we have come through so much in our young democracy. What we do now must brand us as soldiers of conscience rather than cowards and quitters. There is courage in defiance. There is courage in taking the steps needed to truly transform our productive lives. Overcoming poverty is the highest challenge facing us today. The youth of the country are marginalized and the unemployed are desperate. There will be a revolution unless we pull together. We must pay living wages, serve our stakeholders honestly, and rise to the many challenges of corporate citizenship. In order for political and business leadership to be more effective, to achieve more, we need connectedness, compassion, integrity, humility, reasonableness, and the determination to be effective predicated on knowledge, what I call a sense of efficacy. The attuned leader is an effective leader in that sense. Such leaders can step boldly into an uncertain future with the certainty that the followers will lend their support. Leaders cannot stand alone, but must stand with their followers, interpret their needs, strive to fulfill their hopes, and be their champion in the struggle of life. A lesson which many need to learn before it is too late is that leadership is achieved, not given or grabbed. A leader's moral authority is given by the community around them, be it in business, the neighborhood, or the country. Where this is not happening, as in South Africa today in large measure, we need to seek for sanctions against reckless and self-serving leaders. Where are these sanctions to be found? As I hasten towards closing, I'll itemize just a few. To rephrase the question, how are responsible citizens to exercise their power over leaders who have gone astray? Firstly, in civil society, there are those who we call stakeholders, the individuals, foundations, and groups in communities who expect and demand service from the leadership and are not getting it. They are raising their voices in service delivery protests in the streets, but they need to make their demands palpable through the democratic process, the power of the vote. We have suffered the cruelty of apartheid and through struggle won the vote. It must be used. Secondly, through the courts and the legal processes, through the public protector and other independent institutions of the state, we must keep up the pressure to hold leadership accountable. We know that some of these institutions are being perverted for narrow political ends, but we must continue to insist that the principles of autonomy embedded in our Constitution be upheld and wrongdoers brought to book. Thirdly, in political structures such as formal parties, parliament, provincial and local government, and at leadership level in the civil service, those who are aware of mismanagement and corruption must speak to be heard. Silence gives consent. It is not good enough to express one's disapproval through what has been called moral silence. That is, keeping still as a form of judgment. Fourth, in business, the media, labor unions, and other private sector bodies that have a voice in public affairs, there has to be both meaningful engagement with government and critical distance, allowing for strong and substantive policy differences. Corporates, in particular, have a responsibility to show integrity and a sense of citizenship, thereby setting a standard for good governance. Fifth, to those in our universities and research institutes, including the students who waged the Fees Must Fall campaign in bidding for transformation of the education system, let us not forget we are both contributors to and competitors in a global community where brain power, intellectual capital, creates prosperity. We must not self-destruct our knowledge assets. And lastly, it is appropriate to add that conservatives and African traditionalists should be calling the country's leaders to account. After all, the ancient philosophy of Ubuntu was born in Africa, or African communities, and I, for one, owe great lessons of wisdom to this spiritual source. Our people's elders are duty-bound to insist upon the moral rejuvenation of those in power. In these 6 ways, I believe errant leaders can be brought to heel. It is going to take a collective and cooperative social effort to achieve this. The alternative is degeneration into a failing state under failing leaders. The principle of mutual trust and dependence has been lost sight of in the many leadership crises which have affected this country in the past few years. Leaders and followers are interdependent. This is where I believe the philosophy of African humanism, or Ubuntu, can come to the rescue. Ubuntu shows appreciation for the inner creative life of all team members, conferring freedom to think, to try out, and to make connections. Ubuntu is highly appropriate to modern society because it promotes decentralization of power and in business spreads decision-making authority. We are all members of the human race and share our humanity. But it is our humanness that binds us ethically to each other. May I conclude by paraphrasing Mahatma Gandhi. The things that will build us as a nation are politics with principles, pleasure with conscience, wealth from smart hard work, not entrepreneurship, applied knowledge with a wholesome character, responsive business with morality, science and technology with humanity, worship with sacrifice. The attuned leader sets out to serve followers, pioneering the direction they need to take, transforming confusion into clarity, despair into hope, and most of all, their dreams into realities. May our leadership be attuned to and seek to resonate with its stakeholders. I thank you very much.
Wow, I shouldn't be here, but I noticed that Nick chickened out. He didn't know how you follow that. Reuel, you were unduly humble when you said following the earlier luminaries you were humbled. I think we all realize that you are, we kept the best for last. So many thanks to Mike, Nick, and those of you who attended. I think that's been a startling presentation from which we will all learn and which we will contemplate and ponder. Thank you very much indeed. That closes the proceedings, and it is our great honor that you've accepted our Luminary Award. Thank you very much, Dr. Khoza. And thank you.